Kevin Gordon here for Auto Savant, coming to you from the 2014 Kia Sorento. This is the SXL version of the Sorento, or the highest level trim version that can be purchased. The Sorento is new for 2014. Kia is quick to claim that it's 80% new, although to spend time with it, it doesn't feel like it's really 80% new, although I'm sure they've touched quite a few of the parts and the components of the car. What I can tell you after spending a full week with the $42,000 Kia Sorento SXL is that I've had a really hard time putting this car into some kind of association that would make sense to you, the viewer. What I would say is we're not really typically that big on comparing, say, this to an iPhone or something like that. But when you start to look at the Sorento, it seems like something that would fit with, say, a knockoff brand watch. But the problem is that the knockoff brand watch would be less expensive than the brand name watch. Well, the Sorento doesn't fall into that category. It's just as expensive as its competition, if not more so. So before we get back to what is the Sorento, let's talk a little bit about what's updated for 2014. The major changes are, of course, styling. Now it's got LEDs basically all over it. The front grille's been redone. This trim level, the limited trim level, is new. It only comes in 3 colors. You can have it in white, black, or gray. This one's bright white. It has 19-inch wheels. The new 3.3-liter direct-injected V6 is new to this car for this year. We've had the chance to sample it in different guise, I suppose, but very similar versions in the Azera from Hyundai, as well as the Santa Fe long wheelbase from Hyundai. In this instance, it makes 290 horsepower and 252 foot-pounds of torque. We'll talk a little bit more about the engine and transmission in a little bit. But in getting back to what makes the Sorento, at least in this super high trim level version, and why it's a little bit strange to me in some ways. This car has ridiculous amounts of options. I mean, I have sort of read through them and lived with them and been through them, and there's no way from memory I could go through and hit every one of its sort of specialized options. But just to start, it's got a heated steering wheel, it's got heated and cooled seat, it's got a power rear liftgate, it's got sunshades on the windows, it's got illuminated door sills. I mean, it sounds goofy to say illuminated door sills, but those are the things that if you're driving a German rival, they could whack you for $2,000 or $3,000 to get them in an option pack. It's keyless. It's got a giant panoramic sunroof. It's got real Napa leather seats. It really is a outrageously optioned car and comes with stuff that I really can't figure out where else you could find at this price level. The weird part about the Sorento winds up being that, if you price it against its competition, which really winds up being the Santa Fe Sport from Hyundai, even though that car only comes with the 2-liter turbo and not the V6, the Ford Edge, and like the Chevy Equinox, at $42,000, and to understand how I got to that price, the Sorento SXL, you can get it in 2-wheel drive. This one's all-wheel drive, will get you up to about 40. Then it's also got the third row seat, which is a $1,200 option. And in addition to destination, you get to about a $42,000 out the door sticker price. You can't build those other 3 cars really like for like to this. You won't get them to be quite as expensive. Then again, you can't get them with the full set of features. I mean, every feature that this car has in any of those other models. So it's a bit weird for Kia to be playing in this space of more expensive in a lot of ways than everything else that's out there, but with more options than anything else that's out there. Where I think that sort of concept of like a knockoff brand or a generic to me starts to come in, is the fact that it has all these amazing features and this amazing content, but all of it just doesn't seem to come together just perfectly. And at the end, we'll sort of go through good and bad about this, and I'll talk through what to me starts to really not quite feel like a 100% cohesive unit in the Sorento. Talking a little bit more about the engine and transmission. So the 3.3 liter V6 that's in the Sorento is really a very, very sweet engine. It sort of, to me, is reminiscent of some of the early Honda V6s. And I say that because to me, the like 3.5 liter V6 that you wind up getting these days in a, say, Pilot doesn't actually have the refinement that the Kia unit does. I mean, this thing is a sweet sounding, rev happy, power at the top of the power band engine. The issue winds up being that it is a little lacking for torque in the bottom of the rev range. You know, they get that big 290 horsepower number. It makes 252 pounds of torque, but it's up high in the rev range. And when you're motivating something that's this size, that's moving around the amount of mass that this thing is, it just feels a little anemic at the bottom of the rev range. And I think a lot of that has to do with the 6-speed automatic that's connected to it. Now, I will say, full disclosure, what's weird to me is in the Santa Fe long wheelbase that we tested, I didn't notice the same sort of lethargy from the car and the transmission, but the 6-speed unit in this one is clearly geared to get fuel economy sort of as you'd expect it. But as a result, the first gear is pretty tall. I mean, between this is first, and that's second. By the top of second gear, you're going 66 miles an hour. So it just sort of goes to show that those first two gears are tall enough that it doesn't really allow that engine to operate where it would want to. And as a result, it feels a little lethargic off the line. Now, out on the highway, once it drops a couple of gears, which it's perfectly happy to do, it moves itself right along with authority. And it never feels harsh, it doesn't buzz, it really is a very nice unit. The combined number from an economy perspective you wind up with is about 20, which seems about fair. We've gotten 18 and a half, driving it really more city than purely highway. Of course, in that option set, you wind up getting the new updated nav screen. You also get a LCD speedo display that lives in between the center stack here. It gets you a bunch of information about the car in a digital, not analog versus digital, but a full digital speedo, needle and set of numbers. The nav screen works well, is pretty quick to respond. It's powered by Microsoft's Uvo system, which is really a lot like Sync. It works about as well. They do have some buttons tied to it. This one, because of the fact that the Sirius or Sirius XM subscription's been expired, we haven't gotten to play with it fully, so I'm going to save a full technical review of it for a later car that we get with one that's fully functioning. And then a little side note there while we're on it, most of the cars that come with new or interesting technology, we're trying to do secondary reviews of just the tech in the car. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, take a look at our channel, subscribe, and stay tuned for those types of things. It's when you get to things like the comfort of this car that sort of slightly generic underpinning or sort of design methodology or the way it's built starts to come through. Like, for example, I'm 6'1", of course, these days like 220. And not that my weight has anything to do with it, but you'll notice, like, I'm down to less than an inch of headroom in here, and I've got the seat, I promise you, the power seat is as low as it can go. The result winds up being that the steering wheel sort of feels unnaturally low, and just the driving comfort and, like, the seat itself, the comfort of that, really isn't up to even, like, its natural competition, the Hyundai Santa Fe, which I thought the seats were actually pretty comfortable and the driving position was quite good. Other things that wind up being a little off is that in the second row, it's really tight back there to the front seats. And I think that's a result of the fact that they shoved a third row in this particular model. Now, the third row is optional. I haven't gotten a chance to drive a 14, one of these without the third row. So without it, they may get the second row seats to be able to slide back farther than they do in this. But because that third row's there, the second seats are really pretty cramped. And I know for myself, I don't sit far away from the pedals of the steering wheel, and I can't sit behind myself in this car, at least in any kind of comfort. You'd think, well, the trade-off is then the third row's got to be decent. And there again, the third row is really for children only. And with the third row seats up, there's almost no storage room behind them. Now, if you do put the third row seats up, you can, I think, slide the seats back a little bit farther in the second row. But you, like I said, wind up with no storage space back there. It really, it seems like when Kia dropped, I believe, the Borrego, which was their 3-row SUV, could be wrong there, they sort of said, we need to have a 3-row SUV, so they shoved a third row into this, and they haven't really done themselves any favors. The third row winds up being almost useless with the exception of for small children, and the second row winds up losing a lot of comfort because they stuffed the third row behind it. The final thing on the not-so-great list, and then I promise that's it for the bad, is the steering. So, of course, now with a lot of the Hyundai and Kia models, they've gone to this, you can adjust how much power assistance is being provided in the steering. While I've never felt the need to play with it in the other models I've driven, in this, I've actually gotten it cranked all the way up to sport mode, because in comfort, or the easiest setting, it is frighteningly light. And even in normal mode, there winds up being a sort of piece of play in the electric steering of this car that you want it to have build up immediately off center, and it doesn't really wind up having it. It's like it's free for just a little bit of a turn, and then the electric power steering starts to grab and understand what you want and starts to provide some feedback. But it's the most indistinct of the modern versions of the Hyundai and Kia cars that I've driven, and really just, it sort of unfortunately leads to that sort of down class feel that you get from the car. I do want to be fair to the Sorento though. It is a lot of money, but it comes with an outrageous amount of content. It's got a decent stereo. The nav is about as good as you're going to find in this class. There's a set of features in this car you just can't find anywhere else. I mean, it's got second row heated seats. It's got window shades. The little things like the door handles when you unlock the car at night light up really brightly and are very pretty. It's got 19-inch wheels that actually are reasonably attractive. In the limited trim model, you get red painted brake calipers. The grille is very attractive. It's a very good looking thing from the outside, and actually it's very handsome on the inside. If you're a person of smaller stature and didn't sort of mind the super high driving position with where the steering wheel is, it may actually work out perfectly for you. It might be very comfortable. The fuel economy of it winds up being sort of competitive with everything in its class. And while I was quick to give the third row a hard time, it is there if you ever need it. Like if you've got 4 little tots to drag around and you really need to put them not in the front passenger seat, the third row, while you may not want to live with it every day, in a pinch, it really serves a purpose. And so, while I sort of spent this whole time talking about generic and basic and not really fitting, allow me to finish on a bit of a different thought, which is, to get to this level of trim anywhere, you may actually start shopping outside of cars like the Santa Fe or the Edge or the Equinox and get into its German rivals. Well, if you do that, suddenly the Sorento becomes an utter bargain at $42,000. I mean, when was the last time you went out and built a BMW X3? If you built it anywhere close to this level of feature set, you're suddenly going to be at like $55,000. Now, it may seem a bit unfair to cross-shop an X3 with the Sorento and sort of compare them in prices, but I will say that given my recent experiences with BMWs, they're far from perfect in all of their ergonomics and steering feel these days, so it isn't really that far of a stretch. So to sort of wrap this car up and come to some kind of conclusion, so the Sorento winds up being something that's really ridiculously appointed. It is capable, it's nicely finished. I mean, even little things like they've put soft touch materials on the pillars. They've really put some serious effort into equipping this car to very high levels. So if those are the things that are important to you, and as you go take it for a test drive, you don't find the annoyances that I have annoying to you, really it's worth a look. With that, Kevin Gordon for Auto Savant. Look forward to talking to you guys soon.